Hello, everyone. Welcome to redtreehouse.org webinars, and we're happy to have you here today with us. And we are also happy to have Kwame Christian back with us after his November conflict webinar that was so successful. Just some housekeeping kinds of rules and information. This is basically what you will see. And you have a control panel on your right. If you are all in muted mode, and we will be using the questions or chat area for engagement. So if you have chat, that would be for areas for when Kwame asks you for input or not specifically questions that you might have. Questions we'll be using for actual questions, which will be fielded by our co-organizers. On the screen, you can collapse or expand your screen using the orange arrow, and you should be either using your microphone or your telephone. So if you're using the computer audio, that should be clicked. If you're calling in through the phone line, you should have the phone call link button checked. I want to tell you just a little bit. I'm Janine Carroll. I'm the Director of Marketing and Outreach for the Ronald McDonald House of Cleveland, and tell you a little bit about how Red Tree House is connected and a program of the house. The Ronald McDonald House of Cleveland has not just our house that serves families whose children are receiving medical care in the community by providing a place to stay and essential resources and services, but we also have other kinds of programs, including family rooms that take the concept of the house and put it into the family room, into the hospital, where they can come and get a break, a snack, a bit of respite, some time to themselves right there in the hospital. And then we also have found that families need additional resources and supports, and we can connect them to those before, during, and after their stay through our redtreehouse.org Ronald McDonald Family Resource link, the website that is hosting this webinar. It is not open just to families of the Ronald McDonald House, but anyone can use it, and it serves all of Ohio. I also want to thank our grantor that has made these series of webinars possible, the Ohio State Bar Foundation. And of course, although it's made impossible by the grant, the views that are expressed herein do not necessarily represent those of the Ohio State Bar Foundation. And so we're going to be going into the webinar, and this is the second in a series of webinars that we have done with Kwame Christian, and we had one in November, and we only had an hour, and we saw that that just wasn't enough time for all of the great content. And so we were thankful that he agreed to come back and do a second webinar. We also had a podcast that he had us on to answer some of the additional questions that people had that didn't get answered, but we have an hour and a half today, and so we're hoping to delve further into the compassionate curiosity framework that he started to discuss in the first webinar. So I would like to actually launch a poll here to see if folks have actually seen the first webinar or not. So if you could respond to that, I would appreciate that. I'll just give it a little bit of time. It looks like most people are voting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll and share those results. And it's about half and half. So some people will, may need a little bit of a review, but we don't want to go too much into depth of the previous. So very good. All right. Now back to our introductions about today's webinar. As you can see, some of the learning objectives, we're looking at delving a little bit more deeply into the compassionate curiosity and really helping to use conflict as a tool to increase your understanding and strengthen relationships. Now I'm going to turn it over to Helen Rapp, who is going to, one of our panelists today, and she is going to share some information about Kwame. So,
good afternoon, everybody. As Janine mentioned, my name is Helen Rapp, and I have been volunteering at Red Tree House for about 1.5 years now. And in that capacity, Janine and I have organized a number of resource guides and webinars that are intended to help both the families of children with disabilities and the professionals who help them. The topic of today's webinar, using compassionate curiosity to find confidence in conflict, is something that we think can be beneficial to both families and professionals. And as the parent of an adult child with significant disabilities and as an attorney, I can think of many instances over the years where I would have benefited from some of the tips that will be shared with you today. As Janine mentioned, this webinar is a follow-up to the webinar in November. And we realized during that session that we had really just scratched the surface. So it's my honor to once again introduce today's featured speaker, Kwame Christian. Kwame is an attorney. He's based in Columbus, Ohio. He's currently the director of the American Negotiation Institute. Kwame puts on workshops all over the country. He also gave a very powerful TED Talk in 2017, and he hosts Negotiate Anything, which is actually the top negotiation podcast in the United States. Negotiate Anything has been downloaded over 500,000 times, and he has listeners in 181 countries. We're also very proud to announce that Kwame is the author of a best-selling book, Nobody Will Play With Me, How to Use Compassionate Curiosity to Find Confidence in Conflict. So please join me in welcoming a man who I know will inspire all of us to be more confident in the challenges that we all face.
Hello, thank you for that introduction. It's great to be back here. I say great to be back here as in like online talking to all of you. I was in the Caribbean last week visiting family. So as far as being great to be back here in the cold, I look out at the snow, I'm like, maybe it's not that great, but we're still gonna have fun today. So with the way that I present, can you all see my, my PowerPoint here? Just let me know in the chat to make sure it's coming through correctly. The way that I present, it is very interactive. I present much better the more I'm interrupted. So if you have a question, once it comes to your mind, ask that question, because I think it will be good to assume that other people who are listening have that exact same question. And now what we would want to do is just use the either the question or the chat and see if the question goes through directly to the chat, then I could see it. If not, just use the question tab, and then the other people in charge here will ask the questions to me, and I'll be able to see it there. So we want it to be as interactive as possible. Since about half of you have seen the earlier presentation, I don't want to spend too much time rehearsing or rehashing that information. But for those of you, the other half who haven't seen it, I want to make sure that we're at least all on the general same playing field here. And so the way we'll start off is by first talking about the compassionate curiosity framework. How do we use it? What is it? What are the steps? And then we're going to move into some frequently asked questions. These are some of the questions that we didn't get to last time, and some questions that often come up in my other presentations. And then we're going to talk about strategies and tactics in general. So this is a little bit more aggressive. And I say aggressive because what we're doing is we're trying to accomplish a specific goal, whether it's a negotiation or a conflict. There's a specific outcome that we want. And the framework does a good job of setting that foundation. But once we have that foundation, we want to layer more strategies and tactics on top of it so we can start to move forward and move towards our goals in a more systematic way. And so again, as we go through it, ask a lot of questions because that brings a lot of the content to life. All right, so how do we manage conflict? This is the compassionate curiosity framework. It's very, very simple, and it is intentionally simple because when we are in these conversations, we get stressed. It's not easy. A lot of times we are a little bit emotional because we care about the outcome. It's important to us. And so what we found is that when it comes to these difficult conversations or stressful situations in general, there is a stress hormone called cortisol that clouds our thinking and makes it difficult for us to think clearly. And so because of that, I didn't want to have something that is incredibly complex. I wanted to have something that's very simple. So first, we acknowledge emotions. Then we use compassionate curiosity. We get curious with compassion. And then lastly, we use joint problem solving. Okay, acknowledging emotions. And so with this step, what we're doing is very simple. We are seeing what the person is giving us. So if we're in a situation where the other person is upset, we will say that. Oh, I can see you're a little bit upset, or maybe are you a little bit frustrated? If we see the person is, let's say, even if it's a positive emotion. So I see this excites you. You're happy about this, and give them an opportunity to share that emotion. Now, if it's a positive emotion, you really don't need to spend too much time because they're already in a mental state that is positive and conducive to having the difficult conversation. It's really the negative emotions that we need to focus on. And this comes from the part of the brain called the amygdala. This is where all of these negative and positive emotions originate. It is the most primitive part of our brain, and it's very sensitive to perceived threats. And so what's interesting is that we will have a very similar response to a physical threat that we would to an emotional threat, because it doesn't really distinguish between the two. So if we see a rabid dog running at us, our heart rate will elevate, our body will be filled with adrenaline, and we'll be ready to fight, run away, or freeze. That's the third fear response, which probably in this case wouldn't be very helpful. But in the same situation, let's change the situation and say it's an emotional threat. We're having a difficult conversation. We are going to have that same rush of adrenaline where our blood pressure will elevate. Our speech will become rapid because we are breathing at a higher rate. This isn't good for difficult conversations if we're in that mindset. And so the reason why we acknowledge the emotions of the other side is because we want to bring that to the fore. It's already there. They might try to hide it, but it's already there. So we want to acknowledge it and let them know that we see it and give them an opportunity to share what that issue is. Because if we don't address that emotional issue, it will continue to be a barrier throughout the conversation. So you want to stop and acknowledge the emotion. Try to label it, give it a name. And if it's a situation where the person doesn't feel comfortable sharing, maybe they like to see themselves as stoic. No, I'm fine, don't worry about it. What you could do in that case is personalize it. So what I do is I say, if I were in your situation, I would feel X, Y, Z. And so that often seems like a safer way for them to say that they're feeling something, because you have taken the step and you've been vulnerable on their behalf. The next step, compassionate curiosity. And so I don't want to use this as an opportunity to really dissect what compassion is or isn't, or get into that kind of semantic argument. All I want you to do is think about somebody who is compassionate, somebody either in the world or somebody in your life that you know who is compassionate. Whenever I ask this question, probably about half of the people say Mother Teresa. That's who comes to their mind when they say compassionate. Or somebody says somebody that's in their life, like a grandmother or a mother who is caring and loving. Whoever that person is, what you want to do is you want to ask yourself, what would that person, what kind of question would that person ask if they were tasked to ask an open-ended question in this situation? So the person I think about is Mother Teresa. So in my business negotiations as a lawyer or in my mediations, sometimes I start to get heated. I want to start to go back and forth, but I say, all right, I need to ask a question. I need to learn more about this situation, but I want to make sure that my tone is in the right place. And so if Mother Teresa was in this, if she were in this negotiation, how would she ask an open-ended question? And it changes the way that I ask the question, and it seems less threatening. Because if you ask the question in a threatening way, then you run into the situation where all of the work that you did in step one with acknowledging emotions is undone. And now you have a new negative emotion to deal with. And so knowledge is power. Knowledge and information, this is the lifeblood of difficult conversations, negotiations, conflicts. The more you know, the better able you will be to solve these problems. So you need to learn as much as possible. And once you start to feel as though you have a good understanding of the situation, then you can move forward. And so the beauty of this is that this is all rooted in psychology, because the first step, we're dealing with the amygdala, trying to quiet the amygdala so we can move on. And now with this situation, with this step, what we're doing is we're asking questions. And in order for the people to answer the questions at a high level, they need to use their prefrontal cortex, which is located in their frontal lobe, which is that glowing part of the brain you see in this picture here. And so this is the part that's highly evolved, the most evolved and most advanced part of our brain. And it's the part that has logical reasoning. It's the part that has emotional regulation. When we're having these difficult conversations, we want to be using this part of our brain, and we always want the other side to be using this part of their brain as well. Because if they are highly emotional and negatively emotionally triggered, that's going to be problematic. But if we have them using this part of the brain, then we can have a productive conversation. And you get there by asking questions. And so one of the metaphors that I use is the light theory of negotiation. And so with the light theory of negotiation, what we're saying is, imagine if you were in a dark room and you couldn't see anything, and you know that the goal, the door, is on the other side of the room and you need to get there. What is the first thing that you want to do? The very first thing you want to do is turn on the lights so you can see, so you understand the hidden dangers that are around you. And you keep turning on the lights until you can see everything. And so in these difficult conversations, the light is information. So we want to make sure we turn on those lights before we start moving towards our goal. And so the goal would be achieved oftentimes in our minds. What we think is that we achieve those goals by making definitive, declarative statements, blah, 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 trying to get people on our page and establishing and asserting our agenda early in the negotiation or the difficult conversation. But what we're seeing here is there's some work that needs to be done. We need to address the emotional barriers. We need to take some time to turn on the lights by asking questions and learning, and then we can move on to the next step. And then the last step is joint problem solving. And what this is at its core is just collaborative negotiation. You know you're doing a good job when you reach this point and it doesn't feel like a conflict anymore. It feels more like a joint brainstorming session. You both recognize that there is a problem and you don't think the other person individually is the problem. And so you're working together, trading ideas to see what potential solutions exist. And so this is the simple framework that you want to utilize when you're having these difficult conversations. And again, jump in with any questions as they come up. A question that we get oftentimes is, how do you calm your own emotions? Because they say, listen, Kwame, that's great. Now I had a crazy person over here and now they're cool. That's great, but I'm still mad. How do I deal with that? If the emotional issues that's causing the problems in these negotiations are my own, how do we handle that? Again, the exact same way. So the beauty of the compassionate curiosity framework is that it works internally and externally. And optimally, we want to use this internally before the difficult conversation arises. And so if you're feeling emotionally triggered, you need to stop and ask yourself, what am I feeling? What is the emotion? Label it. Take the time to actually label it. Give it a name. Am I mad? Am I sad? Am I lonely? Do I feel concerned? Is my ego being threatened? Figure that out. And so then you move to the next step, compassionate curiosity. And it's important to focus on that compassion side, because oftentimes it's easier for us to give compassion to other people than it is to give compassion to ourselves. We are often our own worst critics. And so the reason that I want you to remember to do this compassionately is because if we judge ourselves harshly, we're going to stop the analysis short because it doesn't feel good. Because sometimes, let's say me as a lawyer, if I get mad in a mediation or a negotiation, I could say, Kwame, this is your job. You've done hundreds of these, and you're still feeling this way. Stop being such a loser. Suck it up. Do better. And so if that's my analysis, then I'm not going to want to analyze anything any further. That didn't feel good. And so you want to be compassionate and treat yourself with that same level of care. One of the things I like to do in my spare time is play tennis. And you can either play singles by yourself or you can play doubles with another partner. And one of the things that you'll recognize about tennis players, the people who are really serious about tennis players, is that we talk to ourselves a lot, and usually it's not very nice because you're out there by yourself as a singles player, and it's kind of hard because the rules say you can't talk to a coach, you can't talk to the opponent, you're just out there by yourself. So there's a lot of self-talk. And so one of the rules of thumb that I've heard is you want to treat yourself like a doubles partner. If your doubles partner makes a mistake, you're not going to tell your doubles partner that they're terrible. You never see doubles partners treat each other like that. But singles players, when it's just them on the court, they're just berating themselves. So you want to treat yourself with a little bit of compassion, and to use that tennis analogy, you want to treat yourself like you would a doubles partner. Now we move on to the third step, and so it's joint problem solving. And I know the question is, how do I engage in joint problem solving with myself? If it's just me, who's the other person? Well, in this case, what you want to do is you want to get your emotional mind and your logical mind on the same page. You need to make sure that everybody, like the concerns that are within you, are being addressed, because sometimes your substantive needs are different from your emotional needs. And so as a mediator, sometimes I see this. There might be a party who comes into this mediation, and it might be a situation of litigation, and one party is unrepresented. So what you often have is a situation where they've never been in this type of litigious atmosphere, and they don't really know what to do. So I have to guide them a little bit more. And so sometimes the other side will give them an offer that's reasonable. It meets their economic needs, it meets their legal needs, and it is the deal that gives them the most financial and legal protection. And so it makes sense. It's reasonable. They should take that offer. But then I look at them and I see a little bit of distress, some discomfort. And so I ask them this question, because I know that the deal makes sense. But I ask them this question: a year from now, if you look back on this deal, how would you feel about yourself? Would you feel like you did the right thing, or would you kind of disrespect yourself for accommodating the other party in this way? And a lot of times they say, no, this is deeper for me. And so if you come up with a solution that really, really hurts you emotionally, sometimes you're in a situation where you need to, but sometimes it's not that necessary. And so you want to make sure that the deal that you create meets your emotional needs and substantive needs. And so you do this by yourself before you come to the negotiation table. And then once you have those options that work for you, now you can have the actual difficult conversation externally with the other party, and you are confident in the fact that the solutions that you bring to the table work for you when you get to part number 3, where you're engaging in joint problem solving with the other party. All right. Let me check the chat to see if we have any questions. Okay, perfect. Now, when we have these conversations, sometimes we have these situations where the conversation starts to fall apart. We don't know why. We just know that this doesn't feel good anymore. This is becoming unproductive, and I'm losing control of the conversation, and it's not exactly clear why. And so there are going to be three main sources of breakdowns in communication: frame, pace, and direction. These are where the issues are going to originate. So with the frame, what we are talking about is the storyline that you have for the conversation. Why are we talking? What is the point of all of this? And so the frame is what you want to do is you want to make the frame so positive that it encompasses your goals and their goals. And it's so positive that they would look actually ridiculous if they were to reject the frame. So let's say it's a situation where you're dealing with a family. You're an administrator at a hospital and the family is having a difficult time, and you're trying to get them to change their behavior to make sure that it doesn't negatively affect the other people in the hospital. And so you say, listen, our goal here, as my goal here as a hospital administrator, is to make sure that you and your family receive the best care possible, and that the other people around you receive the best care possible, and there is no detrimental impact of each other's existence. We don't want anybody to be hurt in this situation. And so that's a situation where it would look pretty bad if you say, I don't care about the needs of the health needs of the other people around me. It's something that they will never accept. They would never go against that. And so once you establish that frame, once things start to break down, you keep going back to the frame to let the people know why you're having this conversation. What's the point? And so you want to start the conversation positively. And this is one of the few times where I say that it's important to try to jump in front of the conversation and at least start with that. And then you could lay back and ask some questions and listen. But first, you want to be able to be the person who establishes the frame before the other side inadvertently establishes the frame negatively. The next thing is pace. Like I said earlier, when you are having that stress response, when the amygdala is firing and your adrenaline glands are pumping, everything starts to go faster. You're in fight or flight mode. And so your body is gearing up for literal physical battle. But you're not in physical battle. You're sitting down, talking to the other person. And so if that's what you're doing, it's going to happen at a more rapid pace, because you're going to speak rapidly because there's a lot of energy, a lot of pent up energy, and your breathing becomes shallow. So you're talking really, 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 really fast. And so if you're talking really fast, the other person can sense that, and then they're going to start talking really fast to try to get their words in. And so everybody is becoming very triggered. And so once you recognize that the pace of the conversation is becoming elevated, what you need to do is slow it down. And again, you do this by asking questions. The secret weapon in any of these discussions, whether it's a negotiation or a conflict, your secret weapon is going to be asking questions. Because if you're asking questions, you are controlling the flow of the conversation. So imagine if you're watching the news or you're listening to the radio or a podcast. Who has the control if there's an interview? So you have the interviewer and the person being interviewed. So the person being interviewed is the person who's talking the most, right? But what are they talking about? They're talking about the things that the interviewer is asking the interviewee. And so they, even though they are talking more, they are being controlled by the person who's asking the question. So when the pace starts to get very high, what you want to do is slow it down, ask a question, and get things back on track. And then the last thing is the direction. Excuse me. You want to make sure that you are talking about things that matter, things that are important. Hold on one second. Let me grab some water. I told you this cold is killing me. So you want to make sure you're talking about things that are important. And in this situation, this is focusing on your goals and the goals of the other party. Hold on one second. Quick. Thank goodness for the mute option. So you want to have a keen understanding of your goals, where you want to go in the conversation, and where the other person wants to go. And then you want to make sure that you're asking questions and talking about things that move you in the right direction. There are going to be things that are irrelevant. You want to let those go and focus on what's important and move in that direction. All right, let me stop and check questions real quick. Okay, so now we're going to move on to some commonly asked questions. So what if I'm dealing with somebody who is passive aggressive? So what we want to do first, let's get an operational definition for passive aggressive. So somebody who's passive aggressive is somebody who is really undermining what another person is doing, but they want to shroud their behavior in a cloud of plausible deniability. They don't want to attack the situation head on. What they want to do is they want to try to make sure that your goals are not accomplished and they can accomplish their goals without direct combat because they don't feel comfortable doing that. And so if you recognize that somebody is engaging in passive aggressive behavior, what you need to do first is bring that behavior to the fore, because what they're doing, potentially what they're doing, is they are trying to work behind the scenes because they don't want to have that confrontation. And it doesn't need to be a confrontation. It doesn't need to be anything negative, but you want to have that conversation so you could actually address the potentially negative behavior. And so you say, you just simply, without judgment, explain what it is that you've seen. So for instance, if it's a situation where, let's use the hospital example again, you're an administrator at the hospital and something needs to be located at a specific place in the room. So you put that thing in that place, then you come back and it's moved. Okay, weird, maybe a coincidence. So you put that thing back and then you come back and it's moved again. And so what you say is, listen, I noticed I keep putting this thing here and then it's moved. Is there an issue with the location of this specific item? And so what you're seeing, again, the situation where they didn't want to talk about it directly, but they're taking actions that undermine what you're doing. So you bring it to the fore and you give them the opportunity to address it. And once you do bring that to the fore, then you just use the compassion and curiosity framework again. So you acknowledge the emotions, you figure out what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and then you try to engage in joint problem solving to see what the situation is. But the thing that makes passive aggressive behavior difficult is the fact that it's like trying to grasp at smoke. You try to grab something and then it just disappears into the ether. And so you want to make that concrete so you can actually address it thoroughly. Sometimes I have an agreement, I think I have an agreement, and then later it becomes clear that the person did not agree with me. So how do we deal with that situation? This is a situation where somebody said yes, but it's clear that they really, truly were not on the same page. And this is really difficult because you feel good, you move on, and now the conversation's done, and you think you have a deal, but you didn't. So what you do, you have to recognize that there are multiple kinds of yeses. Not every yes is created equally. So you have a confirmation yes, a counterfeit yes, and a commitment yes. You want a commitment yes. This is where the person is actually on the same page as you. Hold on one second, let me get some water. And so the confirmation yes, what we're seeing here is somebody is saying yes to you, but really what they're saying is, I understand what you're saying. This makes sense to me, okay? And sometimes we're so eager to get that yes, that we just take that and run home with it. That is not what we want to do. The next one is a counterfeit yes. This is essentially an adaptation of the freeze response that I talked about earlier. So a counterfeit yes is when somebody says yes just to end the conversation. So you see this a lot in domestic relationships. So a spouse might just say, yes, 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 yes. Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. Do they want to do it? No, they just want the conversation to end. Again, parent-child relationships. Yes, dad. Okay, I'll do it. Yes, okay. What they're doing is they are just trying to avoid the conversation. It's either the freeze response or the flee response. They're just trying to get out of it. So how do we test the yes? How do we know whether it is a true commencement yes? And so what you want to do is you want to figure out how they plan on executing on the agreement. So yes is nothing without how. You have to ask questions and figure out exactly what it is they plan on doing to truly commit to what it is that you've agreed to. One second again. All right. So the next scenario, how do I use the compassionate curiosity framework if I don't have enough time? So as you can see, this is a situation where you want to go about the conversation the right way, but you don't have the time. So maybe we have 10 minutes. Wow, how do I acknowledge emotions, engage in compassionate curiosity, and joint problem solving in 10 minutes? This could take a lot of time. So what you want to do is you want to set expectations early. Excuse me again. You want to set expectations early and let them know that you do not have enough time to engage in the conversation in a way that you typically would. And so what I often do is I say, listen, in this conversation, there are going to be times where I might seem short and it might seem like I'm cutting you off or speaking very quickly. And I apologize in advance for that. It's not because I'm not interested in what it is that you're saying to me, or I don't value this conversation, because I do. I just have this specific time restraint. And you want to make that abundantly clear up front, so that once you do start engaging in those behaviors that might seem that it might look like you're hurrying, or it might seem like you're pressuring them, they understand beforehand why that might happen, and it gives you a little bit more grace when it does inevitably happen. All right, before we move on, I believe this is the last scenario. Oh, we have one more. So how do I deal with someone who is under extreme emotional distress? And so in this situation, what you need to do first is recognize the psychology of what's happening. So again, the amygdala is firing. There's something in all of our brains called mirror neurons. And so mirror neurons are these neurons within our brains that focus on not acknowledging, but recognizing the emotions of others and then reflecting it back to you. So imagine if you are with a friend and you're looking in each other's eyes, not saying anything, and the friend just starts to smile. In a few seconds, you have no reason to smile. You will start to smile too. That's why if other people start laughing, you'll start laughing too. That's why people play laugh tracks in sitcoms. Remember from the 90s, they have the laugh tracks. It actually increases the amount that people laugh because we reflect the emotions that we see in other people. For me as a mediator, this is something that I have to be mindful of all the time. So if somebody comes at me and they are incredibly emotional, I need to stay calm. I need to stay compassionate and empathetic. And I want to show that with my body language. I don't want to get tense or start to bottle up, because that's reflecting back the negative body language that I'm receiving. So I intentionally want to stay open and listen. And so that's the first thing, because simply doing that eventually will help them to play off of your emotional lead. So instead of you being sucked into their negativity, you are sharing your positivity and your calmness with them. That's the first thing. The next thing is, when we're talking specifically about the compassionate curiosity framework, is in this situation, what we're going to do is we're going to spend a lot of time in step one. And so with the compassionate curiosity framework, it is not a rigid type of situation. If everybody's on the same page, everybody knows all that they need to know, you can just jump straight to number 3 and do joint problem solving. And then if you're having the conversation and you recognize that, wait, there's something that I don't know, then you go to compassionate curiosity. So it's very, very flexible. In this situation, you're going to spend the majority of your time in phase 1, acknowledging the emotion, because that is going to be the biggest barrier that you're facing in a highly emotional situation. Identify the emotion, ask questions to figure out why they feel that way, and understand what they're thinking. And so you acknowledge the emotion, and then we're going to get to this later, you also validate it. But you can acknowledge and validate without agreeing. And so what that is you can just simply say, I understand why you feel that way. That makes sense. You don't agree with their their methods, you don't agree with their goals necessarily, but you can understand where they're coming from. And at a deep, visceral level, people simply want to be understood. They want to be understood. Even though the worst villain, most people don't even see themselves as villains, even though they are actively sometimes acting in a very, very negative way. They can rationalize it. And so you want to help them. You want to demonstrate that you can understand their rationality. I was reading a book recently called Getting the Truth, and it was CIA operatives who were talking about their interrogation techniques. And the word that came up all the time was compassion. Very, very fascinating. Hollywood does a terrible job of showing us what true interrogators do. Because if somebody is really going like incredibly aggressively at you with questions and making you feel like a bad person, you don't want to help them. You don't want to share information with them. No, you bottle yourself up. You start to clam up. So one of the things that they kept saying was shields down, information out. And so you want to create trust with the other person and use compassion to help them to share and empathize with them. And then you also want to rationalize for them. I can understand why you feel that way because of X, Y, Z. Great, somebody understands me. And now you'll start to see them start to slow down and calm down. And then you can move on to step 2 and 3 of the model. And with that, I believe that is the last. Yes. So let me check questions. Still no questions. Very, very fascinating. Okay, so here's the deal. I have extra copies of my book here. For the first person who asks a question, I will mail them a copy of my book. Okay, so when the question comes, share it with us, please. It makes it a lot more exciting. So strategies versus tactics. Let's just make it make it really easy to participate here. So who knows the difference between strategies and tactics? Does anybody know? I'll give it 5 seconds and then I'll just and then I'll tell you. Okay, not seeing anything come up on the chat. All right, so strategies. Strategies, those are your overarching goals. This is what you're trying to accomplish in the long run, the big picture. This is what we're talking about there. When it comes to tactics, what we're looking at are the specific things that you do at the proverbial negotiation table during the conversation to execute on the overall strategy. So there can be tactics within strategies, but there cannot be strategies within tactics. Strategies, tactics, okay? So keep that in mind as we go along.
Kwame?
Somebody said strategies are making a plan.
That's right. That was Linda Ware, and we did have a few more comments too, but Linda, I guess, gets a book, right?
That's right. Good deal. Very good. Can you read some of the other comments to see where other people were?
Strategy is thought out, whereas tactics are tried. That's from Christy Taylor. And Linda also said tactic is how we talk with the person. Shannon Roberts says strategies are what you want to use and tactics are what you applied. And Linda says, great, she loves that she gets the book.
Good, very good. Yes, you all are on the right page. That's perfect. Very, very good. I am glad to know that you all are out there. That is good. Good deal. So here are some of the things that we want to consider when we are creating our strategies. We want to analyze our goal and we want to be very, very specific with what our goal is. And then on the other hand, if there is a party on the other side, or I don't want to necessarily say on the other side to make it seem like we're always against each other, but the other person that's in the conversation, we need to analyze what their goals are. What do they want? What are their hopes and their dreams? And so what we want to do is we want to create a scenario where we can align those goals. And so there's some creative ways that we can do it. So every time I present, I try to find some way to weave in my life's greatest accomplishment, Kai, because people like him more than they like me, which is okay. And so sometimes I have to be creative when it comes to aligning our goals. So in the morning, you'll remember in the last time when I spoke to you all, I talked about in one of my negotiations with Kai, they always seem to happen in the morning. So in this situation, I'm trying to get Kai ready. And so his mom, who is a doctor who has to leave early in the morning, she is getting ready. And so I am already ready because I get up earlier than both of them. And so I'm trying to get Kai out the door as quickly as possible so I can get on with my day. And so I say, Kai, come on, let's go. Let's hurry. Let's go. He's like, no, I want to eat breakfast. And at this time, he's already eaten. He is just intentionally stalling. Don't fall for it. I don't fall for it anymore. He's like, no, I don't want to go. I want to stay at home with you. Blah, blah, blah. Whatever excuse it is, he comes up with it. But then I realized that there is a goal that I can align here, because what is my goal? My goal is to get Kai out the door into the car so we can actually go to school. Kai's goal is to do what Kai wants to do, whatever that happens to be at the time. And so one of the things Kai likes to do is race. He loves running all over the place. And so I say, listen, Kai, we don't want mommy to beat you. We need to get ready first. We need to hurry. And so he's incredibly competitive. And so if I say that and then I run to his room, he'll just follow me. And what's funny is he starts talking trash to Whitney. He says, mommy, we're going to beat you because you're too slow. There we go. So now our goals are aligned, and he is willingly doing what I want him to do because he thinks it's really what he wants to do. So our goals are aligned and he moves in the direction that I want him to move. So that's an example of how you can be creative when it comes to aligning goals. Hold on one second, another water break. Thank you for bearing with me with my illness. Okay, so another thing to consider is identity. How do the other people see themselves? How do you see yourself? And so, like I said earlier, nobody sees themselves as the villain, but that identity that they have is going to be very, very strong. And it's going to be difficult for you to accomplish your goals if your goals are contingent upon unseating that identity. Oh, you think you're this way? Well, let me tell you how I see you. And as a result, you need to see yourself differently and then give me what I want. A lot of times that's unnecessary. The majority of times that's unnecessary. You can allow that person to still see themselves the way that they want to see themselves, but still change their behavior in a way that satisfies your needs. So one of the things Winnie and I are doing right now is we're spending a lot of time together watching The Office, rewatching The Office. And I guess we could throw up a poll for how many people watch The Office. But there was an episode called The Dundies, where the people of Dunder Mifflin, the job where they worked, Michael Scott, who was the boss, was giving people awards. And they are kind of gag awards. And there's a woman there named Pam. Pam has been working there for a long time, and Pam was engaged for 9 years. And so every year he gave an award for longest engagement, and it was really embarrassing for Pam. And so Jim, Pam's friend at the time, wanted to stop Michael from doing that award, giving that award this year, and embarrassing Pam. So one thing about Michael is that he thinks he's really funny. He thinks he's the funniest person in the world, and he actually says it, even though usually it just comes off as offensive. And so what Jim did in the conversation was when Michael said, everybody loves this. Everybody thinks it's a really great idea. Everybody especially loves that award. And Jim's like, oh yeah, no, you're right. Everybody thinks it's hilarious. But, a really great comedian always mixes up the content. You don't want to get stale. And Michael's like, yeah, that's right. I'm going to mix it up. And so Michael was allowed to see himself as a funny person. And Jim was allowed to accomplish his goal. He was able to accomplish his goal of changing his behavior in order to protect Pam. Michael's identity was preserved. Jim's goal was met. And so this is an example of how you can consider identity and approach the conversation in a way that protects the identities of both parties, how they see themselves while still changing behavior. So here, the way we're going to finish up is we are going to talk about some tactics, and I have the image of a circle here because just picking tactics is difficult for me because there are so many, and it's kind of like trying to find the starting point of a circle. Everything looks good. So we are going to see where I randomly picked. I think these are the most applicable and practical ones and the easiest ones to implement. And so we're going to start there. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask. Okay, so I just finished this book today called The Code of Trust. Whatever tactics that we use, they need to have trust as the foundation. Because when it comes to trust, it doesn't matter if you say something, if the person doesn't trust or believe what you say. And so trust is established over time. And a lot of times what we recognize is that people try to have these conversations with other people only when they need something. And there's no underlying relationship. There's no foundation there. And so once you recognize that somebody has come into your ecosystem, you want to immediately start building trust with them, just in case you need to ask for something down the road. That's the strategic reason why. But just being a generally good human, building trust, relationships that are typified by trust, that is a generally good thing to do, because there's value in every single relationship. So think about somebody that you trust. Why is it that you trust them? Let's try and get some responses here. What are some elements of trust, or in some of your relationships, why do you trust certain people? Let's get some responses. Janine, anybody coming through?
Yes, Kelly has said they'll give honest feedback. And Marla says, speaking the truth even when it is difficult. Also, Kathy says you'll know because they are accountable. I know they will do what they say they will do, from Sherry. And Kelly also says they listen well. And Marianne says they do what they say they will when it is important.
I love it. Yes. So some common threads here. They listen. They give honest feedback. So you trust what they say, and consistency. So if you trust something, you believe that they will do what they say they're going to do. There is trust there. So for instance, there's a lot of trust with random drivers, believe it or not, even though there are times that they test our patience. In general, we trust drivers because we recognize that every time we get on the road behind the wheel, we are trusting that the other people around us are going to follow the rules. If not, we're dead, right? So we trust that other people are going to do what they say they're going to do and adhere to the rules. We trust that the brakes are going to work when we press the brakes. So those are some of the examples of trust. Another thing is that one of the things that came up was that they'll listen, but in order for somebody to listen, there needs to be somebody talking, and that's you. And the reason that you feel comfortable talking with them is because they are not judging you. I think about the friends that I trust the most. I'll tell them anything because it comes to their capacity to hurt you and their willingness and capability to hurt you. Can they hurt you? And then will they hurt you? And then will they judge you? And so if I'm not going to tell people secrets very often, if the first time I tell them, I feel judged. Oh, okay, so that was a stupid idea. I told you, thanks. I feel good now. I'm not telling you anything ever again. And so in these conversations, it's a really delicate balance, especially if it's a situation where it seems as though there are opposing sides. How do we establish trust in those relationships? Because we don't want to say or do something that puts ourselves in a vulnerable position, but we also want to conduct ourselves in a way that we can accomplish our goals in a way that doesn't hurt other people. And again, that's why we need to pay attention to their goals. We need to figure out where they want to go and why, and figure out ways that we can work collaboratively in a way that doesn't hurt them. And when they share things with us, we want to acknowledge and validate what they're saying without necessarily agreeing and without judgment. Because if we do that, they'll trust us more and they'll share more with us. It's the wrong way. One of the things we need to consider is listening. So again, this was prescient because listening was something that came up very often. But we need to listen holistically. So not just listening to what people say, just their words. We also listen to their tone. What can we gather from their tone? But also body language. And body language, once you learn about body language, it's almost like mind reading sometimes, because when it comes to body language, there's a significant amount of body language that's cultural. So for instance, I was in a mediation yesterday, and the woman was from a different country, and I did my typical thing. I said, "Hi, I'm Kwame," and I stuck out my hand to shake her hand. She's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't shake men's hands." So in other cultures, somebody refusing to shake your hand, that's a big deal. That is a big deal. But here, it wasn't a slight. I didn't take it as a slight. Okay, that's a cultural thing. Body language, there was a rejection of physical contact, which I can respect because that was a cultural thing. Now, there are other things that are tied to body language that are directly to our limbic system. The amygdala is something that's within the limbic system. Again, very primitive part of the brain. These are automatic responses. And so I remember I remember in one of my introductory psychology classes, my professor was talking about the look of disgust and how it's a visceral response. And all across different cultures, it's the exact same face. So the way that she did it was, she's like, imagine your favorite family member, the one that you're closest to. And now I want you to imagine kissing them on the lips. And everybody's like, ah, gross. So it's an automatic response. You can't help it. And so that's the thing that really makes understanding body language so powerful. Because if you can really understand body language, there's certain things that you cannot hide. And so when I read these books on body language and getting the truth, I always read the books by former FBI and CIA intelligence officers, because they know the psychology and they know how to operationalize it, right? And one thing they all say is, when it comes to hiding your own body language, don't even try. Don't try, because you cannot, because it's automatic. Now, there's certain things in general you can do to sit more openly and nod your head when people are talking. But when it comes to those quick automatic responses, the best thing you could do is recover after you've already done it, because it's going to happen automatically. So here are some rules of thumb. Before you start analyzing people's body language, you need to understand the baseline. How does this person typically behave? How do they typically comport themselves in everyday conversation? And so trust listening with your eyes is body language. What you want to do is you want to pay attention to small talk. Again, this is another one of the reasons why we want to have established a relationship with this person, because if you know how the person behaves in a situation where the stakes aren't high, you can establish that baseline and see how they act in general, and then see deviations from that baseline. The next thing is, we don't want to look at body language in isolation. We don't want to look at just one gesture and then come to conclusions because of that. What we want to do is we want to look at clusters of behavior. These are clusters of 2 or 3 gestures that happen within about 3 seconds of a stimulus. So if I say, let's go back to the hospital example again, because it's easy. If I say to a hospital administrator or a nurse, I need my spouse, she's in the hospital, I need her to be in a different room right now. And so if I see the nurse, after I say that, furrow her brow and change her position like this and say, oh, okay, let me see what I can do about that. Those were 2 big things. Okay, so the furrowing of the brow, the arms crossing, and then the stroking of the chin. So she's thinking there's a lot there. And so what you can tell with body language isn't truth or untruth. You can't really necessarily tell specifically the veracity of what people say, but you can tell their response to what is being delivered to them. So you can tell comfort versus discomfort. And so closing yourself off, furrowing your brow, that's an example of discomfort. That's a pretty obvious one. One that's not as obvious is the fact that the body becomes more truthful the further away you get from the head. Think about it. If you have a 5-year-old son, and so the son it's Christmas time, the son opens a gift. He's really excited. It's from his Aunt Mabel, and he opens the gift, and it's a quilt that Aunt Mabel knitted for him. He was super excited, and then he opens it, and he's like, "Oh, thank you." That's not a good response. And so what do we say as parents? I know my parents would say, Kwame, fix your face. Fix your face. Say thank you. Smile. Say be grateful. And so what's funny is that culturally, we're taught at a very, very young age to lie with our face. So people become very, very good at lying with their face and manipulating the way that their facial features come across in order to seem more truthful. And so if you are upset, sometimes you can force a smile in order to make it seem like you're okay. But your legs, your feet, will demonstrate discomfort. For example, if you're having a conversation and somebody's feet slowly just start pointing towards the door, the direction of the feet and knees will tell you where the person really wants to go. Oh, wait, now I can tell this person is not interested in having this conversation. Maybe I should end this conversation now to give them some relief, especially if it's not a situation where I need something. It's a situation where I am strategically building up trust. I want this to be a positive encounter. And so once I recognize that they need to leave, I'll let them go. Things like that. So if you want to learn more about body language, I suggest checking out Joe Navarro's book called What Every Body is Thinking, a former FBI guy. Really, really great, thorough book. And we kind of touched on this already. Any questions here? Let me take a water break while I ask for questions. Aha, question. What if misinterpreting body language leads to further conflict? For instance, brow furrowing could mean deep thinking about something. Colleen, fantastic question. And so what we want to do when it comes to reading body language is that we read body language not in order to come to specific conclusions, but we use body language as a tool to look for signals where further investigation is necessary. So if I'm talking to somebody and they furrow their brow, I'll say, so I'll stop what I'm thinking. I'll stop that train of thought and I'll say, so what are your thoughts on this? I know there was a thought. I saw that thought. So I'm going to ask that question. A lot of times they're thinking about something else. I do this when I present. If I see somebody's face, a lot of times I'll say, I see a question on your face. And so they'll say, yeah, blah, 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 blah. They didn't raise their hand. I just saw their body language change, ask that question. Sometimes I do that and they're like, no, I was thinking about something else. Legit. Okay, great. The reality is the body language just tells that there's a shift in the mood. Something came up in their head and now I want to investigate further. So don't come to specific conclusions. You just want to use it as a tool to learn more. Really great question. The name of the author is Joe Navarro, Navarro. Good question. So next thing, any other questions before I go on, by the way? Okay, micro negotiations. And so imagine this. So imagine you're in a gym, a weight room, and there's a rack of weights on one side of the room. And it goes up from 5 pounds all the way up to 120 pounds, just sitting there on the edge of the room. And you work at the gym, and your manager says, hey, I need you to move those weights over there. So how are you going to do that? If you're the Incredible Hulk, then I guess potentially you could lift the whole thing over here. I guess. I'm not the Hulk. So what I would do is I would take individual weights. Okay, I'm going to grab these 5s. Now I'm going to put them over here. I'm going to grab the 10s, put them over here. I'm breaking it up into smaller pieces to make it manageable. So in these conversations, we have to consider the concept of persuasive weight. How heavy is this conversation? And sometimes we don't have the success that we want because we run into situations where there is a heavy negotiation and we try to move too much at once. And it's just not possible to get the person's mind from over here to over there in one conversation. And so when we look at the strategy, what is our goal? Our goal is to accomplish a very specific thing. So tactically, what might make more sense is to break that conversation into micro negotiations. Today, my goal is to move the needle this much. Tomorrow, the goal is this much. Next week, I'll come back this much. And now I feel like I have enough on the 3rd week to accomplish the whole thing. So you have to constantly think strategically and figure out where you want to go. And then once you recognize, ooh, there's a potential that I might want to make a change, start moving the needle now. Because if you wait too long, the conversation might be too heavy for you to accomplish what you want to do in that conversation. So there's a book, I forget what it's called. It might be promotion focus versus prevention focus, potentially. But that's what it talks about, the different focuses on that people have. And so what you want to do is you want to tailor your message for the person that you're talking to. So a specific persuasive message that's crafted for one person might be effective, but that exact same message crafted for another person might be very ineffective or maybe offensive. And so you need to know your audience. You need to know what it is that they want. And I think this is one of the many examples of some of the things that you need to consider. So for instance, somebody who's promotion focused is focused on achievement. They are very goal oriented. They're visionaries. They want to aggressively move towards what it is that they want. People who are prevention focused, on the other hand, focus more on risks than rewards. They see the problems. They're the people who are motivated because they don't want to lose. Promotion people are motivated because they want to win. And knowing that helps you to tailor your message. I was reviewing the notes for this book this morning, and they said that oftentimes women become more prevention focused immediately after having a baby because they want to protect that baby. And I said to myself, Kai's 3 now. I wish I would have reviewed these notes 3 years ago because it makes a lot of sense. Because in a lot of those situations where Whitney was more promotion focused when it came to world travel and things of that nature, now she's a little bit more risk averse because of the baby. And so there's certain people who are in certain professions who are more risk averse. As a lawyer, I am typically more risk averse. I don't want bad things to happen to my clients. Whereas my clients oftentimes, they want the world. And so there's a bit of a conflict there. And so you want to tailor what you say to the focus of the person. What is their orientation? Do they want to move aggressively towards their goal, or are they more concerned about the risks and avoiding those risks? So you want to tailor your persuasive message appropriately. I remember I went to Ohio State. I guess I should say the Ohio State University. And one of the fun classes I took as a senior was judo. And so with judo, the goal is to use the momentum of the other party against them. So I remember one time I was going up against my rival in the judo class, and what was cool about the class was you would learn a technique. Everybody learns the exact same technique, and then we would spar with each other using that same technique. So we knew what was coming, but it was good because we're harnessing our skills. One day, I was going up against my nemesis, and I moved towards him aggressively, and then I blinked, and then the next thing I knew, I was on the other side of the mat on my back, and I didn't know what happened. It was the weirdest thing. I literally did not know how my body got from here to upside down in the air to there. I didn't know what happened. So the night before, this guy went to YouTube and learned some new tricks and used them on me. I had no idea. So what he did was, as I came towards him, he rolled on his back, put his knee in my chest, and kicked me over him, and I flipped over him. It was incredible. It was the best move I've ever seen. And so what we want to do in these conversations is when somebody comes at you aggressively, you don't need to counter that aggressively. You can use that same momentum and let the attack pass by. And so, again, one of the things that I said earlier was that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If somebody comes with a specific opinion and you have a different opinion, a lot of times what we do is we go right back at them with the counter. So they make a point, we make a point. We're going against each other. And eventually this turns into an argument or a debate. And when things turn into a debate or an argument, it's a situation where, hold on one second. You create this dynamic where my winning necessitates your losing. And even if I come to a point where I recognize that I'm wrong, I might still keep fighting just so I can beat you. So what you want to do is you want to consider the concept of a strategic sacrifice. In chess, oftentimes you might sacrifice a piece in order to improve your position. And I think about tennis a lot because tennis is one of the few sports where you can actually lose more points than your opponent and still win the match, because it's about which points you win and when you win them, not the overall accumulation of points. So think very strategically about the way that you engage in these conversations. If somebody has a strong opinion on something, you can just let that go and let them have that emotional validation and say, that's a really good point. I can see where you came to that conclusion. If you stay focused on your goals and what you're trying to accomplish, you might recognize that you don't need to counter that point in order to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And by going back and forth and countering them directly, you might be causing unnecessary strife and resistance in these conversations because it doesn't move you closer to your ultimate goal. When you are in situations, okay, perfect. Sorry, just got a time warning there. I think I have a couple more questions and then I'm done. So if you're in a situation where you find yourself in a rigid type of system, so it's a situation where there's strict rules and whatnot in place. You need to do your homework, figure out what rules are in place, and then you want to use those rules to your advantage. And so in conversations, you can use standards. And so what you're doing with those standards is at the beginning of the conversation, you will have the person commit to the standards. So you ask questions to make sure that the rules and standards and guidelines as you see them are still valid. And then you have them commit to it. And then afterwards, you hold them to that standard once you present the situation and show that the situation is in your favor. But a critical part of this is having them to commit to your standard first. Excuse me 1 second. There is somebody knocking at my office door and they won't stop. Give me 1 second. Thank you. Sorry about that. They warned me and said that some point this week they're going to come in unannounced. Here they are. So my apologies there. We already talked a lot about questions. Let me talk about this, how to stand your ground. I think this is one of the most important things that we can address in this conversation. Because when it comes to conflicts and negotiations and difficult conversations in general, there are going to be points where they will make points and make suggestions that simply don't work for you. And you have to say no. You have to reject that offer. And so how do you reject the offer in a way that doesn't damage the negotiation or the relationship with the other side? So I use a technique called a no sandwich. And so what you do is you take your no and you sandwich it between two yeses. So the first yes is to whatever it is that's causing you to say no. So for example, let's say it's a situation where somebody says, hey, today at 1:20 p.m., I want you to come, let's grab a late lunch. You can't say yes to that because you're here with me, and that's where you want to be. So it's not that you're just rejecting the offer summarily without reason. You are here on this in this webinar, so that's why you're saying no. So you start off with the yes. So you say, hey, thank you for that invitation. You express that gratitude, and then you say, what I'm doing right now, actually at that time, I will be on a webinar. So then you go to the next stage, which is a very quick no. So unfortunately, I have to say no this time, and then you follow it up with a yes. And that is a yes to either the relationship or the continued negotiation. So you can say, but I want you to know that I still care about you and I still want to maintain this relationship. I just can't have lunch with you at that time. Or you can continue the negotiation, say, so that's why that won't work for me, but what other time works for you? And that's how you want to do it. But you want to make sure that it is a very, very quick and succinct no. Because if you make your no too elaborate and then you include too many explanations, you give them room to negotiate that no. And so now it's a situation where they said, oh, well, you said no because of this. Well, what about blah, blah, blah? No. Very quick no. So yes, no, yes. And I know we're coming up on time, and so I want to give Janine an opportunity to come in and finish. But before I go, are there any other questions you have for me before I go on these topics?
We're not seeing any other questions right now, Kwame, that are
Okay.
coming in. We did have some questions that I think you have addressed throughout the presentation that folks had asked when they initially registered.
Perfect. Good. Well, good deal. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. And I hope you all somehow managed to stay warm. And thanks again, and hopefully we can do it again soon. And thanks, Janine and Red Treehouse, for the invitation.
Thank you very much. Okay. I'm going to go back. Oop. Sorry, we've been having a few difficulties with, there we go, with technology today, including the internet at the Ronald McDonald House going out unexpectedly. So I think we did a pretty good job despite Kwame's cold and lack of internet connection. But what I would like to tell you is that we would love you to evaluate the webinar, and you will receive, right after the webinar, you'll receive an email, and a screen will pop up with that information, how to do that evaluation. And we really do value your feedback, and we have given that feedback to Kwame, and we appreciate him doing this without, even though he had his cold. So I would invite you to check out the Red Treehouse website. It is www.redtreehouse.org. And if you have questions about this webinar, about any of the other webinars that we have done, or Ronald McDonald House or Red Tree House, you can feel free to reach out to us. On our website, we have a lot of other webinars that have been recorded, and the recording of this webinar will also be up shortly within the next day or so. So we hope that you will tune in for those other webinars. We also have a variety of guides that have been developed as part of the grant from the Ohio State Bar Foundation, in addition to just the tools, events, and organizations that are on the Red Tree House website that you can search by all kinds of different filters: location, the type of topic that you're interested in, the age range of the individual that you're interested in, etc. So we thank you for joining us today for the Compassionate Curiosity webinar. And Linda Ware, we will make sure to get your book out to you. Thank you very much for joining us today. Take care.